Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When you have your army displayed in front of you on some giant plain in a remote part of a planet without so much as a gas station nearby, your forces look imposing, grand, and unstoppable. But take a similar size army and place it on a Yoseminopolis like Coruscant, for instance, and you might still be impressed by the amount of firepower you have at your disposal, but a quick look at the towering buildings around you reminds you that a city of this size will swallow up your forces and present the challenge that will destroy almost any military force assembled in the galaxy. And that's because Coruscant is a place where armies go to die. But don't just take my word for it, let's take a look at the history. Coruscant was always seen as the heart of the Galactic Republic. This is what drew the Jedi to settle on the planet and establish a temple there. The Jedi were supposed to be guardians of peace, but after the Jedi Schism occurred, a group of Dark Jedi were expelled from the Order and exiled in the Outer Rim. This was a terrible move because these exiles would land on the planet of Korriban and within a few centuries started out their own civilization that over a few thousand years later turned into the Sith Empire. Although by that time the Sith had long forgotten about the Jedi and the Republic had forgotten about the Sith. And so you basically have these two great factions who are completely isolated from one another and thriving as a result. That was until a pair of Titan hyperspace explorers, siblings Gav and Jory Daragon, accidentally stumbled upon the world of Korriban. They thought they were going to be rich having found a new hyperspace lane to this advanced civilization, but instead they were immediately captured and interrogated, at which point the Sith were made aware of the Republic and its many riches. Now at the time, the leader of the Sith, known as Marka Ragnos, had died. He was a wise and feared ruler. The two Sith lords, Naga Shadow and Ludo Kresh, were in the midst of a power struggle. Naga Shadow saw the opportunity that the Republic represented, a new civilization to be conquered, plenty of resources to acquire, along with a new war that could unite the Sith in glorious combat underneath his command. Now, one of the Titan explorers, Jory Daragon, managed to escape back to Republic space, where he was able to warn the Empress Teta system of the impending Sith invasion. Luckily, the Queen of Empress Teta had a Jedi advisor known as Odin Orr. This individual had very vivid and specific visions of everything happening in Sith space, and so he believed the Titan's warning immediately. But as happened many times in galactic history, the Republic's central government refused to believe the words of an explorer and a Jedi seer. Also, the Republic military was in a poor state of preparedness at this point. The Republic, from a cultural standpoint, was always more focused on political and economic growth. And so, despite having a much smaller military force, when Nago Shadow attacked with his Sith invasion fleet, the ferocity of the attack along with the Republic's general lack of preparedness allowed the Sith to quickly overwhelm the Republic forces. The primary focus of their attack would be the Legislative District, otherwise known as the Senate District later on in galactic history. Lord Shar Dakan was placed in charge of the actual invasion of Coruscant, and at least initially, his forces were numerically superior when compared to the local Republican Jedi garrison stationed there. With over 10,000 ships at his disposal, the Sith fleet quickly overwhelmed the Republic's defense cannons and orbital defenses. Sith landers would begin dropping massive tusked war behemoths. These were giant monstrosities that were the result of Sith alchemy, an ancient technique that was already lost by the time of the Skywalker saga. Think basically Oliphants from Lord of the Rings, incredibly difficult to take down. The main infantry used by Lord Dakan were the Massassi warriors, also imbued and strengthened with Sith alchemy. This would have been an incredibly terrifying army for a regular Republic soldier to fight, especially against such a vicious and uncivilized foe. Think of the Necromonger invasion of Helion Prime, a death cult invading an important economic and cultural hub where you have a very civilized and perhaps a bit sheltered population suddenly facing one of the most terrifying military forces in the galaxy. Naga Shadow was a few systems away inside of his meditation sphere. It was here he used his force to coordinate his troops through battle meditation techniques. At the same time, he actually created a massive illusion that made his invasion fleet and ground forces seem a lot more numerous than they actually were, a key factor in the Sith's early successes during the ground invasion of Coruscant. But when Naga Shadow's concentration was broken momentarily and those illusions disappeared, it rallied the Republican Jedi forces on the planet who launched a counterattack and basically ended the invasion. The timing was perfect because the Sith's goal was basically to take the Senate Hall, and the Jedi had been mounting a desperate last stand at the front steps of that hall. But the truth is, even if the Sith had managed to seize the political heart of the planet, occupying Coruscant was probably going to be way too difficult for the numbers they had. Coruscant would be the beginning of the end of Nagashadow's Sith Empire. The Republic would chase his fleet back to Sith space and carry out a counter-invasion that is widely described as a genocide of the Sith people. A few pockets of Sith would survive and flee further into the Outer Rim and unknown regions. Nagashadow would also survive and basically wind up as a hermit on the moon of Yavin 4. A 1,000 years of peace would follow Nagashadow's invasion, and that would basically lull the Republic into another false sense of security. The next threat against Coruscant would come in the form of the fallen Jedi Freedon Nad, who discovered Nagashadow's spirit in his fortress on the jungle moon of Yavin 4. Freedon Nad would establish himself on the world of Onderon and rule the world as an autocrat, and even after his passing, his dark side influence and spirit would poison the people of that world and lead to the resurgence of the dark side in the deep core. This would eventually turn several Jedi to the dark side, including an individual known as Exar Kun and his apprentice, Ulic Queldrama. These two would take over leadership of a faction that was dark side aligned known as the Krath, and they would quickly take over the Empress Cheetah system in the deep core. The Mandalorians at the time were under control of Mandalore the Indomitable, and they were raiding Krath-held territory and had attracted the attention of the Sith. Queldrama would challenge Mandalore the Indomitable in one-on-one combat and defeat him with his force powers. But instead of killing the Mandalore and taking the Mandalorian mantle of leadership as was custom, Queldrama instead spared Mandalore the Indomitable and then made him his servant. And with that came control of the armies of Mandalore. With this incredibly formidable force under their command, Ulic Queldrama would launch a huge attack on the planet of Forost, one of the Republic's largest and oldest shipyards at the time. Caught completely off guard, the Republic's forces there were overwhelmed by the Sith fleet, which was also being supplemented by Sith illusion magic. This meant that most of the Republic defense fleet at Forost failed to deploy properly or in time, and so the Sith managed to capture over 300 capital ships, which they would use in the later invasion of Coruscant. Now, Exar Kun wisely argued against invading the capital because Queldrama lacked the strength to actually take the planet. But his apprentice and the Mandalorians were eager to attack and went on without Exar Kun, and once again the attackers of Coruscant grossly underestimated the amount of forces they needed to actually control this planet. Queldrama's main plan was to draw away the Republic defense fleet away from Coruscant by attacking the nearby outpost known as Complex 9. The feint worked well, allowing Queldrama to bypass the Republic's remaining defense forces. He would land his invasion fleet supported by several wings of CX-133 Chaos Fighters and Mandalorians riding Basilisk war droids. This combined force was able to successfully suppress the Jedi starfighters defending the planet and also suppress the ground weapons emplacements. The combined Krath and stolen Republic fleet would start bombarding the surface of the planet, causing all sorts of chaos and casualties. Meanwhile, Republic forces on the ground mounted a determined defense, reporting back to command that the situation was under control. The reality was neither side was actually able to gain the upper hand. The Republic forces were completely unprepared to fight a threat like Mandalorians riding Basilisk. They just didn't have the weaponry or training to deal with this kind of stuff. The Jedi defenders managed to boost their morale and effectiveness in the sectors that they were deployed to, but they were also too few in number. And Queldrama's forces, despite being far more experienced and better armed, were just too few in number to actually take advantage of the imbalance on the surface of the planet. The second stage of Queldrama's strategy was capturing the Republic command center and disrupting the command chain and perhaps even pressuring Republic forces to surrender. During the battle, Queldrama's sorceress Alima Keto cast a force illusion that made Republic soldiers believe that their own weapons had turned into serpents, which definitely made things more chaotic. Queldrama and his vanguard would take the command center and capture it. The Jedi forces on the planet would then launch a counterattack in an attempt to capture Queldrama. The Sith sorceress Alima Keto sensed an opportunity to betray Queldrama and takes control of the Mandalorian and Krath forces and orders them to retreat, leaving Queldrama to get captured. The fallen Jedi probably deserved to be betrayed because his attack plan was pretty dumb. Although his initial feint worked, it only really bought him a little bit of time. It was only a matter of time for the Republic forces to return back to Coruscant and completely overwhelm his small invasion force. His overall battle plan and strategy was hopelessly foolish from the start. He didn't actually have a realistic chance of seizing the planet. His master, Exar Kun, was actually hoping to use a super weapon known as the Dark Reaper to basically scare the Republic into submission, which might have been a better plan overall. Count Dooku and General Grievous's daring strike on Coruscant during the last year of the Clone Wars was perhaps one of the better planned attacks on the Seminopolis, primarily because they had a strategy, a plan, and a goal. That wasn't just, let's attack the planet and see how things turn out. At the time, the Outer Rim sieges had more or less contained the Confederacy of Independent Systems in the Outer Rim territories. For months, there had been discussions about the end of the Clone Wars, which meant there would also be time for Chancellor Palpatine to finally step down and relinquish his emergency powers given to him at the beginning of this horrible conflict. The Jedi and certain members of the Senate were beginning to worry that Supreme Chancellor Palpatine wouldn't step down, even after the war was finished, and so the attack on Coruscant was more or less used to drum up support for the Republic's war efforts, and remind them just how dangerous the Separatist threat was. From the Separatist point of view, the main goal here was to raid the planet and actually seize Supreme Chancellor Palpatine and hopefully make the Republic surrender. Upon arriving above the planet using the Secret Nexus route, the Confederate fleet was able to engage the Coruscant Home Fleet at extremely close range and destroy the majority of their fighting power. The Coruscant Home Fleet was seen as a prestigious posting and had good equipment, but they had really seen very little combat during the war and completely caught with their pants down, which would have never happened had they not been wearing pants in the first place. A really important lesson we should all learn from. As we see, breaching Coruscant's orbit is definitely possible, and many different forces have done it. It also seems like the defenders of this world are often unprepared or lacking the resources to properly defend the capital, for one reason or another. Of course, this could be the Republic's culture of diplomacy and economic development over militarism, but it also could be that the defenders knew that the planet was just too difficult to occupy, and so they would just allow the sheer size and population of the planet to deter any type of invasion force. This is actually what China and Russia have done, historically speaking. Whenever they're facing overwhelming odds or more advanced militaries, they would just use their geography to soak up invading forces and hopefully tire them out. It should be noted that when the battle did get to the surface of the planet, the amount of damage was always devastating for Coruscant. Every starfighter that crashed into the planet could potentially destroy an entire building, which could then collapse and cause more damage in the Undercity. There are simply too many people living on this planet and too densely packed in. The Confederacy's raid of Coruscant's surface was concentrated on the Senate District, specifically the Chancellor's office. This meant that they needed just a small invasion fleet to carry out this operation successfully, giving them a more realistic chance of success. All they really needed was numerical superiority in the local district, which was completely doable. After Chancellor Palpatine was kidnapped by Grievous, the Confederacy would withdraw from the surface. Their fleet had suffered heavy losses, but more than 2/3 of their fleet was still intact. The death of Count Dooku at the hands of Anakin Skywalker, however, did cause General Grievous to withdraw their forces immediately from the battlefield. Overall, several strategic goals were met in the Confederacy's more limited strike on Coruscant. They brought in enough Navy and Army assets for their clearly defined goal of taking the Chancellor. This mission is sort of reminiscent of the Sith Empire's sacking of Coruscant many centuries earlier, when the Sith used a peace conference with the Republic to distract their defense fleet from a surprise Sith attack on the Republic capital. The overall goal of this mission was to raid the Jedi Temple and eventually destroy it with explosives and create havoc in the Senate District. During the brutal attack of the Senate District, the Chancellor and several senators were actually killed in the fighting. This would cause general chaos amongst the Republic leadership. The Sith then focused their attention on random orbital bombardments of the city, causing heavy casualties, along with the destruction of Coruscant's satellite network, further cutting off communications to the world and on the planet. The Sith invasion force would then turn into Occupation World, but this wasn't designed as a long-term occupation. Instead, the Sith Emperor would use Coruscant as a bargaining chip. He would negotiate heavily favorable terms for his side in what would be known as the Treaty of Coruscant. In exchange for leaving Coruscant, the Sith would gain tons of territory that the Republic previously claimed. A Cold War would settle over the galaxy as both sides remained distrustful of one another, but were too devastated to continue fighting a full-on war. Our last invasion of Coruscant is known as the Fall of Coruscant, and this comes from the Deep Legends lore. Actually, this story comes from one of the first novel series I finished in the Star Wars Galaxy, the New Jedi Order books. This invasion has to deal with the Yuzeng Vong War. The Yuzeng Vong were a fanatic warrior race that worshipped pain and destruction. They came from another galaxy that was completely devastated in a conflict between the Yuzeng Vong and two sentient machine races. Basically, they won, but the entire galaxy and most of the habitable worlds were destroyed as a result. The Yuzeng Vong made the arduous journey across the cold expanse between galaxies in large organic generation ships. They barely survived the transit, which they had to make at subspace speeds, and that only made them more extreme as they launched an invasion on the Star Wars Galaxy. Their end goal was taking over Coruscant, which they finally reached in 27 ABY in this timeline. This is one of the most serious planned invasions Coruscant ever faced. The Yuzeng Vong carried out a multi-pronged attack on the core regions of the galaxy, setting up many staging worlds so that a massive combined fleet could be used to take over Coruscant. It's said that this moment was even foreseen by Mace Windu in the middle of the Clone Wars. I have seen the temple in ruins, the Senate smashed, and Coruscant itself shattered by orbital bombardment from immense ships of impossible design. I have seen Coruscant, the seat of galactic culture, become a jungle, far more hostile and alien than any on Haran Kal. I have seen the end of civilization. That last detail about jungles is what makes the fall of Coruscant so different from just the Battle of Coruscant during the Clone Wars. See, the Yuuzhan Vong wanted to not only occupy and take over Coruscant, they wanted to terraform the world and remake it into their own original home world, which they had lost and destroyed. They wanted to use their terrifying organic technology to basically turn all of that concrete into jungle. The initial orbital invasion of Coruscant was horrific. The Yuuzhan Vong were just completely ruthless, and they used refugee ships captured in previous battles as shields. The Yuuzhan Vong invasion fleet quickly advanced on the planet behind these refugee ships, causing panic amongst New Republic ranks, with portions of the fleet unwilling to shoot down their own civilians. This is a very grim, dark period of Star Wars history in case you're not used to the New Jedi Order books. I mean, the Yuuzhan Vong are a threat that is equal to any of the major villain factions in Warhammer 40k. Like, they are definitely worthy. They're that dangerous. The refugee ships, once past the New Republic blockade, were used to ram the planetary shield, which eventually collapsed. Several hundreds of ships in orbit started raining down and destroying the surface of the planet. Thousands of dropships and air skimmers would follow and inundate the surface of the planet with legions of Yuuzhan Vong slave troops and warrior legions. The New Republic defense forces on the planet would mount a ferocious but uncoordinated defense. There would be pockets of success, but mostly the Yuuzhan Vong just overwhelmed everyone with their numbers. It should be noted that the Chief of State, Boris Fela, who was responsible for many of the New Republic's failures during the Yuuzhan Vong War, stayed behind in his office and detonated a proton bomb, taking out at least 25,000 warriors. And this is kind of the problem. You see, the Yuuzhan Vong loved death and dying. Their warriors did not fear death at all. They saw glory in death. And although the Yuuzhan Vong initially took over the entire planet, they even went into the Undercity, their losses were immense. It was estimated that at least a third of the Yuuzhan Vong warrior caste was wiped out in this one single battle. See, the first two waves of the invasion never even made to the surface, and not only were refugee ships slamming into the planetary shields, Yuuzhan Vong warriors also were doing it because they were kind of ordered to, and they saw glory in this. It was just a complete waste of highly trained forces. The Yuuzhan Vong culture was just extremely toxic, and they had a lot of problems like this. I mean, they also worship pain, and they found technology to be abhorrent. The invasion of Coruscant also depleted the Yuuzhan Vong's strategic reserves. This, along with their newly acquired territory all across the galaxy, created a huge logistical problem for them. It was one thing to invade planets and destroy things. It was a completely different struggle to actually occupy them and run them properly. The Yuuzhan Vong bit off more than they could chew by invading Coruscant, and like all those who preceded them, lost their momentum at this planet, and eventually the war as a result. And so I guess the lesson here is be very cautious when invading Coruscant. Have very clear and hopefully limited goals if you are going to invade Coruscant, and get your ass out of there when you're done, because Coruscant's population is massive. It's in the trillions. It's in the hundreds of trillions, probably. And when you get past the defense fleet, which is really the easiest part, when you destroy the ground defenders, which is the second easy part, you still have to deal with the population. And while you might be able to kill 100 billion civilians, there's still trillions upon trillions of people waiting to take arms, to hide in the deeper levels of the planet and rise up and fight you. This is really just not a planet that can be taken. It eats up armies. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.